York State passed a law which is the model the rest of the country should be following.
After years of back and forth, stalled attempts, New York legalizing the recreational use of cannabis, becoming the 15th state to do so. But the new law is raising many questions here in the Southern Tier. Tonight, we get some answers as we look at the highs and lows of legalizing marijuana.
Good evening and welcome to our special town hall discussion on legalizing marijuana. I'm Zach Wheeler. We are coming to you live from the Clements Center in downtown Elmira this evening, and we've gathered a panel of industry and community leaders to discuss the ramifications and the implications of legalizing marijuana, the highs and lows. Let's take a look at where we are today when it comes to this new law that is now legal in New York.
We have passed the point of legalized cannabis. It's in New Jersey. It's in Massachusetts. To say we're going to stop it is not an option.
On March 31st of this year, Governor Andrew Cuomo signed a bill legalizing recreational marijuana for adults 21 and older, a move supporters say could create a potential $4.2 billion cannabis industry, which, if true, would be one of the nation's largest commercial markets. Critics say the money is all a smokescreen, that this will lead to higher addiction rates, higher crime rates, and a high cost to New Yorkers. What does this new law mean for you? New Yorkers who are 21 and older can now legally possess and use up to 3 ounces of marijuana for recreational use and up to 24 grams of concentrated cannabis. Additionally, up to 5 pounds of marijuana can be kept at home if secured properly, and New Yorkers can cultivate up to 6 plants at home, indoors or outdoors, with a maximum of 12 plants per household. Smoking cannabis will not be allowed in schools, workplaces, or inside a vehicle, and smoking publicly where it's not permitted will subject you to a civil penalty of fines or up to 20 hours of community service. And keep in mind, it remains illegal on a federal level.
And of course, the federal government looking to move forward with approving that soon, as we are learning. We welcome our first panel this evening, Chemung County Executive Christopher Moss, Chemung County Sheriff William Schramm, Steuben County Sheriff James Allard, and Steuben County District Attorney Brooks Baker, and Mikkel Fontaine, citizens here in the city. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it. Just a reminder to our viewers at home that we are all vaccinated for COVID-19, so we want to make sure that you knew that because it's an important fact. There was an article that came out today in the Bloomberg law that said that New York's new law legalizing cannabis for adult use is arguably the most progressive in the nation. Is it a progressive law at all?
Well, I think it was a money grab. I mean, look, out of Albany, they're going to gain $350 million from what they've done. I think it's a bad decision. You don't have to look any further than the state of Colorado, which decriminalized marijuana and made recreational marijuana legal 7 years ago. They've seen an increase in marijuana-related traffic deaths. They've seen an increase in just regular traffic deaths. They've seen kids, I believe the age of 12 and up, 100% increase in their use. I mean, it just creates a lot of problems. It probably is one of the most progressive, and it's going to cause problems for law enforcement. It's going to cause problems for the private sector, for the community in general.
You mentioned problems for law enforcement. What kind of problems do you think, as law officials, will this cause for you?
Perhaps one of the biggest problems is identifying the impaired drivers. It's so much different than a DWI encounter, where you can smell the alcohol. You might see a little bit more obvious signs of impairment, where somebody under the influence of marijuana, you might still have the smell in or around the vehicle or the person, but the ability to detect their impairment is going to be a little bit more difficult. You have to rely on drug recognition experts, DREs, which are very expensive to train. It's quite a process to get them through that. Other than that, you have to trust your standard field sobriety test type of evaluation, and oftentimes have to look to get blood from somebody just to see if it has it in their system. So just a lot of challenges in general with that compared to what we deal with normally with DWI arrests.
Are you seeing that as continuing as law enforcement officials? Obviously, you're constantly dealing with this on a daily basis. How right now are you able to figure out if someone is impaired with marijuana?
Well, again, primarily through the use of drug recognition experts. Through their testing, they can tell you what drugs a person is on. What we see is typically a mix, where it's marijuana and other drugs mixed in with it. That seems to be the most common trend that we're seeing. Something else that needs to be understood too is this is a cash majority business, and in Denver alone, you're 200 times more likely to suffer a attack with a aggravated assault within 1,000 feet of a dispensary than anywhere else in the city. So we know that moving forward, that not only are we going to have challenges on our roadways, we're also going to have challenges keeping our citizens safe in and around dispensaries. We're also going to have challenges keeping this out of the hands of people under the age of 21 when it's legal to possess by persons over 21 and it's readily available. It's going to cause a lot of challenges for us in our schools and on our roadways and in the areas immediately surrounding the dispensaries when they come.
Yeah, and it seems that this new law, which is the official name, Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, so you have those two keywords, regulation and taxation. Going back to that taxation, a lot of people who supported this bill said, hey, we're going to bring a lot of money to the state, billions and billions of dollars. Will any local counties, how will we see that?
Whoever sells the marijuana, their municipality will get 3%, the counties will get 1%, the state gets 9%, and that's what will equate to their $350 million. But it's really going to be pennies for the issues it's going to cause. It's going to cause serious social issues for our departments of social services and so forth, and the money's not going to be there to fund that. They claim they're going to use 40% for education. I believe there's 20% earmarked for future rehab and so forth, but I think that may be a long time coming, and I think it's going to take a period of time to see the types of problems it's caused.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think the other thing that we're going to see that's not really set forth and not addressed well in new law is a burgeoning black market. The law has set forth that you can transfer or give away marijuana up to 3 ounces, which creates a situation where traditionally, if you give drugs to somebody, it's a sale. They've taken that away in the marijuana world, and so I think what we're going to end up seeing here is that creates a window for a black market that's going to be certainly going to be utilized by a criminal element, and it'll be a way to end run those tax benefits that they're talking about and create a situation where people, if they can pay $10 less, because they can go buy from the black market, they're going to. So we're going to see a dramatic increase in black market marijuana sales. The market, the folks that are selling it now won't change. They'll just be selling less than 3 ounces, and they'll find a more creative way to do it and avoid those taxes, avoid the benefit that's associated with this law, at least the selling point.
When we see a picture of the marijuana market maybe in this area, what are you seeing on the law front day to day when it comes to the influx of marijuana? Just in general, is there something specific, just an overview of what you're seeing?
Well, the marijuana we see today is much different than the marijuana of 20 years ago. It's much more potent. It's much more, it has much higher levels of THC in it. The other issue that I see with this law is most of the states prohibit smoking to home use. The New York State law makes it open in public so that any place where you can smoke tobacco, you can smoke marijuana, whether that's except for schools and places like that. I see that as a big issue, quality of life issue, where we're going to get a lot of complaints about smelling it in households and having it from the neighbors. I think there's going to be a lot of issues in workplaces where if you can smoke marijuana publicly, it's going to affect that workplace. So there's just so many things that this is beyond what any other state has done, but also there are many issues that have not been contemplated that we haven't come across. The tax issue, something that the county executive can probably help me out with this, but I haven't heard yet how it affects the tax cap if you opt out.
Yeah, I don't know either.
So there's so many unresolved or unanswered questions, which seems to be a hallmark of what we're seeing out of Albany recently.
In your opinion, is there any positives to this new law?
In mine, no, there's absolutely not. In real terms, for the low-level marijuana user, we have been, as a function of law enforcement across the state, using diversion programs and treating those as non-criminal offenses. The only people who are being charged, at least primarily in Steuben County, are folks who are dealing large quantities of marijuana that would still be committing felonies under these acts, or who are selling it to underage people. So I don't really see any positive coming from this. The folks who are who have not been who would now be possessing legal marijuana haven't been being charged with or convicted of crimes for this, as has been the hue and cry for the justification associated with this. I am concerned that the black market situation we're going to see will avoid the tax revenues we've talked about, and even our own governor said this is a gateway drug to other harder drugs down the road, and we're seeing overdoses still continue on a very regular basis in our communities. And if you talk to the people who are addicted to those drugs, most of them say they started with something softer like marijuana. So the idea that there is anything really positive that comes from this, I have a very hard time finding it.
So you just mentioned, which was interesting, because one of the key points of the law was expelling some of the, the penalties that some people were facing that were arrested with maybe just a little bit of marijuana. So you're actually not seeing that then. You're seeing it's really more people with large quantities.
That's the idea that someone possessing a small marijuana was being prosecuted, branded for life as a felon or a criminal is simply fallacious. That was not happening anywhere in New York State, to my knowledge, and I communicate with DAs from across the state on a regular basis. The unlawful possession of marijuana charges are being largely not prosecuted or dealt through some kind of a diversion program, some kind of drug education situation, or community service or dismissed. So the idea that small quantity dealers were being treated as felons is simply not true. That's a fallacious basis for the law.
It was interesting when I was reading an article coming out of Albany, our sister station in Albany, where I believe one of your colleagues, Craig Apple, was discussing a beta form to understand if people were impaired. He said it's very, it's very lucid. It's hard to kind of figure out right now. But from what I understand, the state health department is going to help to educate law officials on that. And I'm guessing you haven't heard anything from the state as of yet.
That would be no. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Zach, if I could go back to a point that D.A. Baker made, and I think it's a very important one because it often is the focus of debate, and it's whether or not marijuana is actually a gateway drug. I spent a good portion of my career as an investigator, and oftentimes when you were interviewing somebody, the purpose behind their committing a crime was to support a drug habit. Most people had a heroin, methamphetamine addiction, cocaine, whatever. When you interview these people, you always get the backstory when you're talking to them in the course of building a rapport. I don't recall one time where I interviewed somebody, they did not say that they first started with marijuana. You don't see a heroin addict saying, yeah, I just started out shooting up heroin or snorting coke or smoking meth or doing whatever I was doing. They always start out with those smaller drugs. Does it mean that every person that smokes marijuana is going to progress into a harder drug? Of course it doesn't. There's a lot of people that don't go beyond that. But there is certainly a strong argument to say that anybody that is doing those harder drugs first started out with marijuana or similar type of drugs with that. So I think that's a huge social issue. And you introduce this as a legal thing. The younger kids see that. I just think it's going to attract them to it. You're going to see a lot more people using it that you would hope that wouldn't.
Yeah, you mentioned younger kids. What kind of message do you think this sends to the younger generation?
Bad message.
A bad message that it's okay to use.
And I think that's something that is being pushed through social media. It's being pushed through big marijuana. It's been pushed to justify this law, is that this stuff that marijuana is somehow safe, that it is different than hard drugs. And it's particularly true in impaired driving. You know, for the last 20, I've been involved in this for 27 years as a DWI prosecutor and as a prosecutor, and the culture over drinking and driving has changed. Just knowing what was acceptable 25 years ago isn't acceptable now. Folks recognize it's unsafe to drink, even with a little bit of a buzz on and drive your car. That's different with marijuana. We're hearing this push that marijuana drivers are safe, that you can drive while you're high, and that's absolutely not true. This is a substance that hits a whole bunch of different drug categories and impairs mental facilities and physical facilities in ways that are different and aren't as measured and understood. And we're going to have to start that whole cultural education process all over again with marijuana driving, because previously it was simply illegal. Now it's a legal substance, and people are telling our kids that it's safe to drive on marijuana when that is absolutely not true.
So what kind of message should we send to our kids, obviously?
The message is that this is a drug. I mean, that's what, and just like alcohol or tobacco, it has terrible long-term consequences for you. If it's going to be legal, then use in moderation is the only way to use it. But it certainly has no place in our high schools. It has no place with our children. It is unsafe. It can impair you, and the same bad things that can happen if you use alcohol in excess can happen if you use marijuana in excess. And again, it's got, we don't even know what the message ought to be at this point because we haven't had enough experience with it.
If I can piggyback on what Sheriff Schramm said about his interviews, the other thing that comes up frequently is marijuana is initially used as a self-medication in reaction to an undiagnosed or untreated mental health disorder, that many people use marijuana to help them get through the day. And it's a reflection not only on our lack of services for folks that need mental health care, but also that leads it into that gateway that he talked about, that as that self-medication doesn't continue to be effective, then we move on to other things to try and handle the depression or the schizophrenia or whatever it is that we're trying to tackle through this self-medication.
Yeah,
we see that an awful lot.
Yeah, it's an interesting point there, because mental health is a major issue that we are facing in this nation. Ms. Fontaine, do you have anything to share specifically about this?
The only thing I would say that comes up is that makes me disappointed, being that I'm a black person, and in our black community we hear a lot about being incarcerated at higher rates due to small amounts of marijuana. But the message that it sends to me when you legalize it is say we're going to modify the law to accommodate your poor behavior, because a lot of the incarceration from what I see does not come from marijuana being illegal, or not being legal. It's the fact that it was illegal. And so therefore, if you choose to engage in an illegal behavior, then there are consequences that come with that. And I'm disappointed that we would create laws to justify that behavior, because I think that's exactly the message that sends to our children.
Yeah, that's a very good point there.
That's a great point.
And on that note, I believe that we have a wonderful poll that we want you to take a part of. If you're doing that, if you're following us on our social media, you can join our discussion on Instagram at WETM18 News and vote in our live poll. It's happening now. Click on our story and vote now whether you agree with the legalization of marijuana in New York State. And of course, we will bring you the live results throughout this newscast. But of course, we have more coming up in just a bit. Keep it here.
Welcome back. I'm Jim Emke, and I am now joined by a distinguished panel of experts as we look at the impact that the legalization of marijuana in New York State may have on higher education. So let me quickly introduce our panel to you now. We are joined by Dr. Carol Ross Scott. She is the Vice President for Student Development and the Chief Diversity Officer at SUNY Brew. We also are joined by Linda Reynolds. She is the College Prevention Coordinator at Binghamton University. And we are joined by Khalil James. He is the President of the Student Association at Binghamton University. I want to start by thanking all of you for joining me today.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, so I will pose my first question to Dr. Ross Scott. Carol, what sort of impact, if any, does this legalization have on how SUNY Broome enforces marijuana rules or handles any sort of marijuana regulations on campus?
Well, it's a double-edged sword because for the campus, the rules actually have not changed. The law may have changed, but the rules on campus haven't changed. And what we have to do is make sure that our students understand that even though the law says cannabis use can happen for individuals who are 21 years and older on campus, it's still a no. And so if students are caught with any kind of cannabis, they are still subject to the adjudication process.
Gotcha. And I think one of the things I've heard coming from other college campuses in New York is the fact that in some ways this is out of their hands because of certain federal regulations tied to federal funding that different higher education institutions have.
Right. But even though our federal funding still is impacted, it is still against the law. We prohibit the use and possession and cultivation of cannabis at educational institutions. It is the law.
Let's speak now with Linda Reynolds. Linda, in your capacity as the College Prevention Coordinator, what's your concerns about the potential impacts on the health and well-being of college-age students from the use of recreational marijuana?
Thanks, Jim. So it's kind of like Dr. Carol Ross was saying, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because we're up against the challenge that there is a perception now among students that maybe cannabis isn't harmful or that smoking marijuana doesn't cause harm. And so there's an educational component that needs to happen. But I think, the biggest sort of challenge is educating students that marijuana impacts everyone differently, depending on what they're using, how they're using, the setting they're using in, their own physiological makeup. It really does have a different impact on different people. And that means, for some people, maybe it does make them feel more calm or less anxious, but the opposite is true for other people who feel more anxious and more depressed over time and frequency of use. There's so many factors right now that can really change how a student experiences marijuana. And so there's a lot of concern around just sort of educating students about the knowledge of what they're using and THC content and things like that. And also, from my perspective as well, there's a component of the combination of alcohol and marijuana and that elevating risk even more. And so that's certainly on my radar, particularly, just given what we know about college student substance use and alcohol use.
Now I'd like to turn to Khalil. Khalil, what's the sentiment, to the degree you've been able to decipher it? What's the sentiment among students at Binghamton University about the legalization?
I think there's a couple parts of the conversation that's really important to have, right? And as Dr. Carol and Linda had mentioned, it's a double-edged sword. Now, the word double-edged sword, at the core of that means perspective, right? Just two perspectives that's going on here. And so, like Linda said, it's about education, right? And I think it's an intricate thing because we have these laws, but we're actually at a campus, a college campus, where we're supposed to lead forward in educating and sharing knowledge, right? At the core, that's what a university should be. And so I think with change in perspective comes universities have to either lean into the fact that they want to bring that change. And again, it's not just for the students, because every university is placed into a community and not everyone in that community attends that university. So we have to be very mindful as universities of our presence on college campuses. So with that being said, it's like we can't just think for students all the time. Yes, that's technically, who pays us as a university. That makes sense. But when it comes to our students, as Linda's saying, like, it could be a little intricate because alcohol and weed, what does that do for you, right? And so I think some of the things that students at least are concerning is, as much as there's for, there's also students that are against. And I think the best thing here is for the universities to come together and figure out a way to educate. Now, there's students like myself that can help them with doing that, right? Like, that's why folks come to me for that perspective. But at the end of the day, I don't sign any papers, and I don't have like that power, right? That social capital to push that conversation forward in that way. I have the power as an elected student, representative, to push the conversation forward. And so I think, again, it's a new law, right? There's new change. It's a new double-edged sword. We've never held it before. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know what it feels like, right? But we do know that it can be used, right? That's something that we just have to figure out together. And I think that is the overall understanding of what's really happening here.
Jim, I'd like to jump in because, Khalil, I fully agree with you. Because as administrators, we're going to be considered the bad guys because, recreational marijuana, recreational drinking, all of it supposedly happens off campus. But when we bring that back to campus and we're trying to implement the law for the greater good for our students, of course, administration is going to be perceived as the bad guys. We need for student leaders to help us get that message across, that it's not something to intentionally penalize the students. It is for the greater good of the community. And it's so that we can make sure that our environment is one that cultivates someone's learning inside the classroom. And like Linda said, you don't know the impact of cannabis on your body, on your psyche, on your learning. And so it's different, it's very individualized. So it's our responsibility to make sure that you're in that classroom with minimal distractions, whether they're physical or emotional or learning, minimal distractions so that you can maximize your learning. And we're gonna need student leaders to help us.
I have just one more question, then we'll wrap up. Linda, in what ways now are you tailoring your message to the fact that you're operating in this new environment?
Well, a couple different ways. I mean, certainly the first and foremost is making it clear to students that we still, that marijuana is not prohibited, or that marijuana is prohibited on our campus. That's the first sort of foremost message. But secondary to that is also, like I was saying, education on the harms around marijuana and the potential dangers associated with marijuana use. And I think, especially with college students, they are very informed individuals, and part of what our job is to really be open and honest and transparent with them. And so trying to have good dialogue with the students about, if they choose to use, what does that look like, and what are they putting themselves at risk for? And also, we have to use our peer educators, as Khalil was saying, to really get the message out. It's one thing for me as an administrator to say something, but it certainly resonates differently when it's coming from peers. And so doing that. But the other piece too that I think is important that we're working on right now is getting more information from our students on their own perceptions of marijuana. We don't, quite honestly, there's not a ton of research on college students and marijuana use out there. And so we have a hurdle in that. We don't know student motives for use. We don't know exactly what the consequences are that college students in particular are experiencing. So we're relying on literature that's not entirely there. And so we're trying to do a survey on our own campus right now. One of the public health classes is actually administering it at the moment, and trying to get more information on what our own students think about marijuana use and what it looks like here at Binghamton, because every campus is very different. And so that's the other piece of this to consider. The culture on our campus may not be the same as it is for SUNY Broome. And so those are things we're trying to figure out at the moment so that we can tailor our messaging even better moving forward. But certainly right now, the biggest message is that it's prohibited on our campus. and secondary to that, talking about risk and harm reduction.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I want to once again thank all of our guests, Dr. Carol Ross Scott, the Vice President for Student Development and Chief Diversity Officer at SUNY Broome, Linda Reynolds, a College Prevention Coordinator at Binghamton University, and Khalil James, the Student Association President at BU. I'm Jim Emke, and we'll have more after we come back from these messages.
Well, we are continuing our special town hall discussion, legalizing marijuana, the highs and lows. I'm Zach Wheeler, and we are coming to you live this evening from the Clemens Center in downtown Elmira. If you are just joining us, we're glad you're with us, and we've gathered a panel of industry and community leaders to discuss the ramifications and implications of legalizing marijuana here in New York State. And just a reminder that we've been vaccinated for COVID-19, so just want to make sure our viewers at home know that. Well, we have a third panel this evening, and I'd like to introduce them to you. We have Anthony Hooks, Community Prevention Specialist with Chemung Prevention, Casa Trinity. Elmira's Mayor, Dan Mendel, joining us. We also have Dr. Carolyn Buckler, an Associate Professor of Practice in the Horticultural Section of the School of Integrative Plant Science at Cornell University. And from the Elmira Police Department, Deputy Chief Anthony Alvarez and Chemung County Assistant District Attorney Susan Ryder Yulako. We thank you all for joining us this evening. We're discussing, obviously, the new law of marijuana, and we've heard a lot of negative aspects about the law. Is there any positive aspects to marijuana when it comes to medical?
To the law?
To the, well, just to the drug itself or to the plant itself?
Well, the problem is we don't know, right? Because we've had this, THC has been a Schedule I drug, so for instance, Cornell gets billions of dollars, federal dollars, for research, and we're not allowed to touch it. So all the research we're doing right now, cannabis sativa is cannabis sativa. The only reason it's called marijuana or hemp is it over 0.3% THC or is it under? It's very arbitrary. It's the same plant. But we can study it and look at the various genetics of it now. Now that it's the states have many of the states have legalized it, and on a state basis we can do that research. The problem is we can't do medical research. There's only one institution in the United States right now that can do human trials on THC, and that's Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi. Everyone else is banned. It's illegal to have federal funds for that. So we're calling it hemp, and we're doing as much research as we can. But I've been a scientist since 1980, early 80s, and I've never seen anything in the sciences where it's been right in front of us the entire time, and we know it's there, and humans have been using it for tens of thousands of years, but we're not allowed to touch it. So there have been very few limited trials at all. And even for the rest of the world. I mean, most of the countries that have legalized marijuana have done so in the last 4, 5, 6 years. So, and it takes years to get a research program going. So the problem is we don't know. We know that THC can cross the blood-brain barrier, so it can affect the brain, and that's a problem for younger folks, people 14 to 25, when the whole frontal lobe is reactivating. It's organizing itself. And the frontal lobe is all about, should I do this or should I not? It's the rational part of the brain. So we all have cannabinoid receptors in our brain. THC and CBD are both cannabinoids. So we really don't know what happens if those receptors get plugged up with THC versus what it's supposed to be doing, or neurons and things. So there's so much we need to get at yet.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a very intense study, and obviously this is early on in the stages with the state legalizing it. You mentioned the youth impact, and I think, Anthony, you are constantly educating young people about drugs. What is your take on this law, and how does that kind of reorganize the way you bring your message to the young people?
It's quite simple. Does legal equal safe? And the reality is that there's a lot of gaps in education, like the mystery of this drug and just the experiences that we're having. It's causing a serious problem, especially in our youth with their underdeveloped mental states, and having that social norm of that it's okay, not just for, the medicinal purpose, but now recreational. What message does that relay to the youth in the city of Elmira and in surrounding cities? Reality is that it's going to create more of an issue for them and confusion for them, knowing what exactly is okay and the fact that it's not safe for them to use. We want them to know. So education is key. And we want to figure out the best way to do that. Unfortunately, we're kind of scrambling a little bit to get that all put together to see what that looks like, just so we have an effective, reach to them. So.
Yeah, because this is very new, and it's obviously new for municipalities and cities, and the city has been dealing with, drug issues. How does a law like this, Mayor, affect the city, and what kind of education can we bring to the citizens?
Well, the first thing that we're basically challenged with is the dispensaries, because we're the ones that either got to opt in or opt out. And by the law, if we do not act on it and do a local law to opt out, dispensaries can be set up. And if we allow that, I haven't talked to the entire council yet to see which way we want to go with this. How do we regulate that? Where did dispensaries go? How do we do that? Two, if we do opt out, it's my understanding from reading the law that the citizens, if they file a petition of 10% of the individuals within the city of Elmira that voted in the last gubernatorial election, so that's 10% of that voting pool, if they submit a petition, and then it goes to referendum, and then the people make a decision whether to support our local law or not. So that's one challenge that we're going to have. Obviously, they've talked about the issues regarding traffic accidents and so forth, and Deputy Chief Albanez will speak probably more on that, but my concern is too is pedestrians. You have a lot of pedestrians in the city, so individuals that are walking and you got an individual that's driving that's under the influence, that could create a big danger. The other thing on the city issue is our employees and drug testing. Where does that go? It relates strictly to labor law in the law. So, we have to take a look at that. Do we take marijuana off the panel for testing employees? So there's a whole bunch of issues that it's created for us, liability issues, and of course, again, with the dispensaries. So we got a lot to work on.
You did mention, obviously, we do have a large population here that walks, but they also ride their bikes too. Deputy Chief Albanez, you've probably seen a large amount of people that are impaired with marijuana. How does the police department here in the city deal with a law like this?
I guess one concern would be, to the mayor's point, is that we've talked a lot about those that are driving motor vehicles, but I think the same type of onus is on those that are operating bicycles and or even pedestrians, that if they're a little bit buzzed or high on marijuana, no different than alcohol, that they should be taking some special precautions to make sure they're following all the proper pedestrian rules and laws, and that's already established through New York State to help keep them safe. Obviously I wouldn't want somebody to be riding a bicycle high, nor would I want anybody driving a car high. As far as the enforcement efforts go with the driving of motor vehicles, to the last panel, it does take a little bit more money to get somebody trained up into the identification of being intoxicated via drugs instead of alcohol. Not that it can't be done, however, it is an expensive process to get even one officer totally qualified and then re-qualified on a regular basis. We currently only have one DRE with the city of Elmira. We do have another one, however, that officers deployed at this time. So that would, if we have somebody that we believe is high on marijuana to the point where they should not be driving, we would have to call that person in to perform the sobriety test.
Okay.
This law doesn't change that. I mean, we still have people that already utilize marijuana before it was legal. So that would be a cop-out to say that our hands are tied at this point because we should be enforcing that prior to the law being changed. So it is something we'll have to mitigate, and we'll have to look at, funding dollars for more training and, maybe give our officers at least a little bit more information on what to be looking for when we're talking specifically with marijuana and not just all other types of drugs or alcohol.
Yeah. I know the DA's office, we just heard from District Attorney Brooks Baker in the last, the first panel. He was mentioning about not having those that had large amounts or quantities of the drug are the ones that we're kind of getting, dealing with the penalties. Are you guys prosecuting in Chemung County, prosecuting, what types of cases are you seeing when it comes to marijuana, and will this law affect any of that?
It usually is the larger amounts of marijuana that we've been prosecuting, so it doesn't really change our position on how what we will prosecute. One thing I do notice, though, with the new marijuana law is what they've defined as the searchable areas of a vehicle when you smell the odor of burnt marijuana. Previously, if a police officer walked up to a vehicle and smelled the odor of marijuana or had the smell of burnt marijuana, they had the right to search the vehicle and every compartment therein. Under the new law, it doesn't give you that option anymore. The only time that an officer is allowed to even search the area near the driver would be if they're investigating a driving while under the influence, of marijuana. They can only search the area closest to the person that was driving the vehicle, and also any container that they feel that there might be some marijuana in. But that really has changed the law. So I'll tell you, a lot of times on just the odor of marijuana with the police, there was a lot of guns coming out of cars because of that. And there was a real safety. I think safety is now, it's not so safe here.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. I do want to kind of talk about, we mentioned earlier before, and we've mentioned that, obviously marijuana is not your grandfather. The marijuana today is not your grandfather drug. We're seeing different species of it, hybrid versions of it, as growers across the nation are splitting those species. What are, when this becomes legal, we saw when CBD became a big issue. There's different people that were producing the CBD, but there's really no regulations on the type of CBD that people are getting. Is this something that we're going to now see with the marijuana products, where you could have a really good company that produces a quality product, but then you could have some Joe Smo not producing a very quality product? What are we seeing when it comes to regulations and those types of issues?
So I think this is where New York State has really done it quite well. So the New York State Department of Health will actually be overlooking all of the products that come out in in New York. So if you're going to make a tincture or a cigarette or whatever it is and sell it to the public, it has to go to an independent lab and find out, to find out what is really in that. If you're saying it has THC in it and it's at this percentage, then it needs to be that. And that also means that it doesn't have any CBD in it, or it doesn't have any other chemicals or pesticides and anything else in it. So the entire ingredients list will be there, and there'll be a little sort of a URL you can take your phone and actually see the institution that did that survey and exactly what's in that. So it's a pretty good thorough system.
So, yeah, it sounds like that. And I know that this law also expanded the medical aspect, where people can grow it at home. That kind of can be a challenge, though, for even law enforcement if you're ending up seeing plants at the home. I mean, it's too early, obviously, to tell, but how would one currently react to that type of situation?
Of growing at home?
Yeah.
Well, they need some background in plant science. It's tricky. There are pests and diseases and things, and again, because we haven't been allowed to touch it. It's only with the 2014 USDA initiatives that have allowed us to do anything. Yeah. And of course, it took a couple of years to get going. But it is a very unique plant. It's a very old plant, it's been around for tens of thousands of years, just with humans using it, and it's been around before that too. So we're going as fast as we can, honestly, to try and get the genetics and the pests and the diseases and the genetic, because the same plant, you know, could test for no THC and some CBD, and then, you know, it goes into flower, and all of a sudden now it has THC in it, and that's been really hard on farmers, because if, you know, it has to be tested 2 weeks before harvest, and if that guy sold you, some person sold you, this is really just CBD, it's just CBD, and something happens in the environment such that the genetics changed, you know, or something is initiated, it could be full of THC now, and so you lose your entire crop, and that hurts. So it's a difficult plant.
It is. It's complex too. It's difficult to grow as I've been studying this up on this issue over the past few weeks. I want to just talk a little bit about the education aspect, because I think that is so important. You know, when we have this brand new law, to educate the public on it. And you had mentioned, Anthony, a little bit about this. Obviously, this is legal. This is the law now. You know, what is the kind of message that we want to send out?
I think the most important, you know, step that we need to take is kind of busting the myths. You know, people tend to just hear certain things and kind of put it into their whole life and how they do things and how they live and how they see it and view it. And it's the misinformation that causes the safety issue. You know, like it's okay for you to do this, or do it this much, or only do it this amount so you don't get caught, or only carry this amount so you don't get caught, or how to do certain things and how to really go about it. So the educational piece has to start, you know, with parents, with the community, and that hopefully will trickle down to the youth, because I mean the social norms of it being okay is what really kind of takes the cake in everything that we're trying to do. We're trying to break down that barrier and say it's a drug, like it's been said here before. It's a drug. There's safety measures you need to take, precautions you need to take, and unfortunately, if you don't know those precautions, you're just going to go ahead and abuse it, and then we come in with, you know, with people needing it, living on a daily, and we can't have that, because that create safety issues for, you know, law enforcement, for community members, for businesses, for owners, for, you know, even just your neighbor. Just it causes that issue. So,
how do you work with the police department in a sense? Is there some type of system where you kind of work together to help educate the young people, especially in our school districts?
Our hopes are just to reconnect. I know we have a prevention team that works within the schools, and you know, we do our very best to stay in communication with you know, sheriff's departments. You know, we participate in our drug-free community coalition is participating in the DEA Take Back Day for prescription meds, and you know, we're trying to stay as active in the community and connected with you know, the EPD and sheriff's department, in hopes to understand how we can deliver a more effective message to our youth and to our schools and to our educators and things like that.
Yeah, as I mentioned in panel one, the two keywords in this law are the regulation and the taxation. And I know, Dr. Buckler, you spoke about the regulation aspects, but what about the taxation? Would the city actually, if the city decides to opt in, would there be a nice economic boost for us, or
well,
have
you know,
taken...
we really don't know yet. It just depends on, you know, how many people are going to purchase it. As I believe the county executive said in the last panel, 3% of the revenue the city would receive and 1% would go to the county, which, you know, are we going to do it for the revenue? So if we opt out, what happens if, you know, the town of Horseheads opts in? People will go to Horseheads and purchase it, and the same with the town of Southport. So there would be a revenue flow for us if we do opt in. Like I said earlier, opting in means that we just don't do a local law opting out. So there would be a revenue flow.
And it's interesting because, you know, one of the big pushes is to help people build their businesses and create an economic aspect to this. But, you know, it's not as easy as you know, you think, because, you know, we were just talking about the growing aspect of growing marijuana. Obviously, it's not as easy, and there's a whole, you know, exchange to that. What are some things that you think are really, when you think about this law of legalizing marijuana, that really just strikes a red flag and a big concern for you?
For me, I'll tell you, I was just talking to Anthony about it, the edibles. We haven't talked about the edibles yet. So what happens now if you got the edibles and people in the community bring those edibles home and their children get a hold of them? Or if the children take them to school and start passing them along, around as candy. That's a major problem. That's a red flag. So that's a major concern. And the fact that people are going to be smoking on the street where they're not supposed to, what can the police do to stop that? The way the laws are written, there's really no repercussions. So it's gonna be a challenge for us.
Yeah, we saw that we had a middle panel discuss education, and I know that they had mentioned that they're following the federal SUNY system will obviously follow the federal system where you can't smoke on campuses. But we thank you all for taking the time and for being with us today to discuss this very important law that is now part of the New York State law system. Of course, we're going to continue our discussion in just a few minutes. We do have a poll, I believe, that we've been utilizing, so feel free to head online and check that out, but we'll be right back. And let's take a look at our poll, our final poll this evening on if you believe that the new law here in New York State is good. In favor, 68%, opposed, 32%. You obviously will continue that poll online if you believe legalization, the law to legalize marijuana here in New York is good. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to special thank every member of the panels that we've had tonight for taking time to join us here, and of course the staff of the Clemens Center. A special thanks for holding it. It is wonderful to be back here in the Clemens Center after so long, so thank you to them, and thank you for joining us for this topic on legalization of marijuana, the highs and lows. Of course, we will continue to follow the ins and outs of this story right here on 18 News and, of course, on our website, mytwintiers.com. But for now, for all of us here, I'm Zach Wheeler. Thank you, and have a good night.